Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Don Wilkinson, and on behalf of my partners at Deloitte and in association with the Institute of Corporate Directors and, of course, our good friends over at BCN TV, welcome all to the Directors Series. As traditional for this time of the year, our focus is on audit committees, and in particular, we're going to be taking a look at what are some of those things you should be thinking about and preparing for as you move to those upcoming committee meetings. Also, we're going to be touching on some things that clearly will be on the agenda for 2016 and certainly beyond that. We are broadcasting to you live from the Rogers Center. We have a terrific registration for today, a strong turnout. And of course, it is 2016, so I do want to take this opportunity to wish you all a very happy new year. It's early in the new year, but hopefully everyone's off to a good start for 2016. Reflecting on 2015, I think for many companies and individuals, they were quite happy to get 2015 behind them. Undoubtedly a lot of challenges if you just think about what happened in the oil and other commodities area in terms of pricing, a severe downward push on there and a big impact on the Canadian economy. The loonie took a beating, as did many global currencies against the U.S. greenback. To some extent, that was supposed to be good for our manufacturing and exporters to our neighbors to the south of us. But quite frankly, perhaps not as much performance as we expected there, and certainly not enough to offset what's happening on the energy sector. And for those of you that I'm sure watching the capital markets, it was a tough year. The TSX probably had one of the worst years compared to the global world and was down more than 10% in 2015. And for those of you that came in, listened to the news flash, a little blurb out of China, and we're having a lot more turmoil in the markets. A little political intrigue during the year. Apparently, Mr. Trudeau, according to electorate, is ready and is going to bring in some new change. And so I think from a business perspective, as you look out into 2016, certainly thinking about some of the liberal policies around international trade, as well as climate change, and as well as the environment, will be a very important thing to be keeping on your watch screen. Also, as I reflect on 2016, it certainly doesn't feel like it's off to clear sailing, and there seems to be a lot of choppy waters out there. I was looking recently at some risk charts, and they're talking about the risks to the Canadian economy. And certainly a lot of movement up to the orange zone and the red zone. And just think about housing prices and some of the bubbles we're talking about in certain geographies here in Canada. And of course, China and other emerging markets, we're seeing the slowdown, and of course that has the impact on the commodity markets. So some tough sledding ahead. You know, I remember at the end of the global financial crisis, everyone talked about the so-called new normal. Now, the new lexicon is slow for longer. So just think about that, slow for longer. And I think it has a number of interesting implications, certainly from a board perspective, if you're driving your strategy, thinking about how do you get growth in a slow growth economy. And more focused in terms of you on audit committees, I think it's going to be a very interesting year-end as you review those year-end accounts and you look at things like valuations and you start looking out anything that requires judgments, estimates, forecasts. I think you have to be careful about just how rosy-colored those glasses might be as you look forward. So some interesting challenges for you on the audit committee. Let's take a look at our agenda for today. It is a jammed agenda. And I would say that that's very much consistent with what we're seeing on audit committee agendas, very full, and I think it is a bit of a challenge. I was taking a look through some material for some audit committee conferences, both here in Canada and the U.S., and it really was quite amazing about the number of issues that the stakeholders are being focused on and audit committees are having to deal with. And those range from beyond the basics onto things like technology and, of course, cybersecurity. They deal with things like audit quality, and we hear about auditor rotation in Europe versus a different approach in North America. We certainly hear things about issues about about malfeasance, and we've seen a lot of fines going out. So this whole area of compliance and ethics, also a very important area. So a very full agenda, and I thought it was quite interesting. Mary Jo White, who is the chair of the SEC, made a comment that she was somewhat concerned that, in fact, audit committees might take their eyes off the ball of the basics. And by the basics, she meant the quality of financial reporting and internal control. So there's something to think about. Are we covering the basics off? And yet we do need to deal with these other emerging issues. Our workload is getting full, so certainly something for you to think about in terms of managing agendas. And even from a workload management perspective, some discussion perhaps with the governance committee. Now let's take a look at our agenda. We'll be touching on a number of these things. First, we're going to be hearing from a regulatory perspective and what's on the radar screen for 2015, which will be important for you to think about as you go through those year-end accounts. Secondly, what we'll be looking at is the area of financial reporting, good quality financial reporting. But quite frankly, we're going to make it broader than that. We're going to be talking not only about the financial statements, but get into the MD&A, non-GAAP measures, and even broader into really getting your story across. So we'll spend some time on that important issue. Last year, we talked about the importance of audit committees and risk and control, and we talked about internal control over financial reporting. We said, by the way, that's probably an audit committee member's very good friend. Well, this year we're going to broaden out the discussion to operational risk, which, if not managed properly, do find their way into the financial statements. And we'll be taking a look at a case study and a format that Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan uses. And finally, a subject we've been talking about for a while, but audit quality. We're going to be hearing from a very seasoned director on her perspective around some of the developments around audit quality. Now, as always, we are going to put you to work. So during the course of the next 2 hours, we are going to put 2 questions to you and getting you dialoguing on some of the subjects we'll be talking about here with the panel. Also, we are going to leave some time for questions and answers. Certainly, what I would suggest is don't wait to the end to get your questions in. There are cards at each of your locations. When a question comes to mind, jot it down, get it to the administrator, and get it to us here in Toronto, and we will do our best to respond at the end of the session. Now, joining me in the studio today is a very seasoned, experienced group of panelists. I would suggest you take a look at the handout to get a fuller picture of their CVs. But to my left is David Mcgraw. David is the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan Board. Now, Teachers, I think, as many of you know, is a very major institutional investor, assets well in excess of $150 billion, managing both here in Canada and also globally. Prior to Teachers, David spent some time with the BCE Group. He was a CFO at Bell Expressview, also the VP of M&A there. He's also a director. So he serves as the audit committee chair of an energy company in Calgary and the Bristol airports in the UK. So David, first time for you on the director series, and welcome, and looking forward to your comments. Next to David is Eileen Mercier, and I know for those of you that follow the director series, you'll recognize this face. We've had Eileen on a number of times. Always some good sage advice for directors, and lots of experience. She is a very seasoned director who has sat on a number of boards in leadership positions. She is currently the chair of the Canadian Payments Association, the former chair of Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan Board, audit committee chair over at Intact Financial, on the board of TK Shipping. The list goes on, Eileen. So lots of experience. And before being that professional director, lots of managerial experience in many different industries, and I think even a consultant around strategy and corporate governance. So Eileen, as always, welcome back to the Directors Series. Next to Eileen is John Bowie. Now, not to be confused with Peter Bowie, who was on an earlier invitation. Peter slipped off to a board meeting in China, and we were delighted to get such a qualified replacement at very last minute in John. John, a lot of experience in terms of directorships, corporate and MPOs. He is currently the chair over at Economical Insurance, and they're going through an interesting journey. They're on their way to going public, and they're thinking about how do they get their story out, and what's the importance of that, and good financial and corporate reporting. So we'll be hearing about that from John a little later today. He's also a retired partner of Deloitte, and he had a number of senior roles with Deloitte, including being the chair of our Canadian board. So John, at last minute, we really appreciate you joining and looking forward to your comments.
Thanks, Don. Great to be here.
And last, but certainly not least, another face I know you're going to recognize. Cameron McInnes, been with us many times for this year-end session. He is the chief accountant over at the Ontario Securities Commission. He's well plugged into a number of organizations and committees, both here in Canada as OSC's representative, as well as international. So on the Canadian Accounting and Standards Board, dealing with things like IFRS. Certainly was involved around the audit quality piece that CPAB and CPA undertook, and working with the international bodies on a number of professional developments. So very well informed in terms of those developments, and will provide some interesting perspectives for discussion today.